Hey, Joe, it's time to answer another question.
Let's do it.
All right, my question for you is what's 5 plus 2?
7.
I, it how that's how many seconds it took you to answer the question.
Anyway, yeah.
Oh.
Long night last night.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. I'm sorry. I should not ask you questions when you're hungover. But 7 is also the number of bottles of wine I drank.
It's what it feels like inside my head. If we could lower the volume on this podcast, that'd be great.
I see. Lower it down to a 7.
Yes.
Lower it down to a 7. Well, speaking of 7, actually, this question has absolutely nothing to do with the number 7 at all. Wait, let me read through. Nope, there is no number 7 in this question, but there are other numbers. There's the number 150,000, the number 80,000, the number 2,000, the number 20,000, the number 250,000. Those are all numbers. They are all in this question. And the question that we are about to answer, our next question, comes from Jen.
Hi, Paul and Joe. This is Jen from Ohio. I really appreciated all of the great financial literacy on your podcast. I just have a question about our extra cash flow each month. We are at a point where we aren't really sure what to do. We have about $2,000 cash flow a month after savings and expenses. I have a traditional IRA that we're going to convert to a Roth of about $20,000. My husband has a full pension plan through STRS. He's a teacher. So he'll retire with probably over $150,000 yearly income. And we live comfortably at $80,000. So I'm not really sure if I should contribute to my Roth IRA because it doesn't really seem like we'll need it in retirement. We also could invest in paying off our house. We have about $250,000 left to pay off our house, so we could invest the extra $2,000 every month to do that. We also have 3 kids, so we could put more into their 529 plans, although we don't want to put too much in there just because, we wanted them to be able to use all of it, and we don't know if they're, going to go to college or not. So I'm not really sure if I should contribute more to my Roth IRA because we will be well compensated with a pension plan from my husband. When he retires from his job, he can choose to take a lesser percentage of his income to allow me an income if something happens to him. So we could easily do that as well. So I wouldn't necessarily need a ton of money into my Roth IRA even then. Any advice?
Jen, thank you for the question. So a couple of things strike me right away. Number one, with the 529 plan that you mentioned you're not sure if your children, you've got 3 children, you're not sure if they're necessarily going to go to a college or university. That's okay. With a 529 plan, you can pay for any qualified educational expense. So if they decide to go to school to become an HVAC technician or an electrician or a coder or a makeup artist, any type of vocational training, as long as it is a qualified educational expense, it does not necessarily have to be a 4-year college or a 4-year university. There's a wide array of training and education in the broad sense of the word, not just college, that you could spend 529 money on. In addition to that, I don't know if you have nieces, nephews, potentially future grandchildren, but if you can always change the beneficiary on a 529 plan. So if you've got 3 kids and their names are Alvin, Simon, and Theodore, right? And let's say Alvin and Simon use their 529 plan, but Theodore uses only 10% of his, right? The other 90% of Theodore's plan can be reallocated. You just rename the beneficiary, and that can go to Theodore Jr.,
It can also go back to you. You can use it for continuing education, the 2 of you, change it to your name. But you're right. It can essentially become an education. It's not actually a trust, but it feels like an education trust
Yeah.
that you've set up.
Right. Another thing strikes me, and this is kind of an uncomfortable topic to bring up, but I'm just going to have to say it. And I don't want you to take this personally. I'm sure your marriage is great, but what would happen if your husband were to leave you? Let's just walk through that scenario. And I hope that doesn't trigger any anger for me even bringing it up, but as a financial planning exercise, imagine if at the age of 62, let's say it's through no fault of his own. Let's say he gets hit on the head with a piece of debris and suffers a brain injury, and his entire personality changes, and then he leaves you as a result, right? So it's not even him. It's the head injury that's doing it, okay? So not casting any character aspersions on him. But let's say that at the age of 62, he were to walk off. How much of the pension that he will be receiving would you be eligible for? I think that is a very important thing to know. And I don't know if you have a prenup, and I don't know if you live in what's referred to as an equitable distribution state versus if you live in a community property state. But if you are planning for your retirement to be largely based on his pension, and a pension is future earnings, then you need to think very carefully about what would happen in the event that he is not there. I say this as somebody who is divorced myself.
I would love it if Jen confirms those numbers. I just don't see pensions that are $150,000 a year.
You know, I was thinking that. So my dad has an STRS pension also. He was a teacher in the state of Ohio, and he has an STRS pension, and his pension is $60,000 a year.
Yeah, I just don't see $150,000 pensions.
But, so I was thinking that initially, but then my thought was, my dad didn't come to America until he was in his, he didn't start working until he was in his early 40s. So he had, only half the length of a career of someone who has lived in America since their 20s or, since childhood.
But still, generally speaking, pensions are based on a percentage of your income, and you get a higher and higher and higher percentage of your income for life over time. And so $150,000 pension would assume, and maybe it's the case that he's making around $200,000 a year. But if they are living comfortably now on $80,000 a year, and they have an extra $2,000 of cash flow, I'm just not feeling the $200,000 number. So Jen, if your husband isn't making $200,000 a year, I might go ask some more questions about that pension, because you might be reading it wrong. You might be expecting a lot more money from that pension than it's actually providing.
Yeah.
And by the way, Jen, you wouldn't be the first person to do that. When I was a financial planner, I would see that many times a year, where people would walk into my office assuming they're getting X from a pension, and I would have to tell them that, no, that's not $150,000. You're getting $40,000 a year. That $150,000 might represent the total amount that has been put into the pension by the company that they're then going to annuitize and turn into an income stream. And if it's only $150,000, it's going to last over his lifetime. That number is not even close to $150,000. It's going to be closer to $10,000 a year, or some number that's way less than that.
Yeah, it did. Joe, I'm glad you said that, because it sounded high to me when I heard it, especially because my dad has an STRS pension as well.
Yeah.
But then my rationale was, well,
yeah.
Again, the whole immigration and curtailing the length of the career, I thought maybe that would have something to do with it.
It could be correct.
Yeah.
It could be correct. I just would want to verify that number. And then, Paula, when she talks about what to do with the money, I love the fact that she knows what the goals are. What I would do is look at, based on those goals, how funded are they? And I think now, if the pension is $150,000 and they live comfortably on 80, well, then she's right. Then retirement is funded. And now it's just flexibility in retirement. And then certainly for me, paying the house down then becomes a great goal. Because it's super conservative to pay the house down. It's the most conservative thing you can do. There's people screaming at their device now, listening to me say this or watching us say it on YouTube. They're like, no, she can beat that. The math is truly, you can beat that. But the happiest retirees are people that don't have any debt. And if you can afford to be that conservative, why not be that conservative and have this free cash flow? So it is the most conservative thing that you could do to pay off that house. Investing it will probably make you more money, but investing it also adds to the stress level that you may experience during market downturns.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable with, unless they have a prenup in place that really outlines this, I would want her to know what the laws are in the state that has jurisdiction over their marriage. Because I'm very uncomfortable. Oftentimes family court will split the current assets as of the date of filing. But claims on future income, and that's all future income, future royalties that you receive from sales of software or sales of books, as well as future Social Security, future retirement. There are a lot of different ways that family courts do it, and the future that you have will depend largely on the jurisdiction that you're in. And on the mood of the judge that day. And you don't want to bet your entire future on that.
So that brings up something interesting. So what you're saying is, theoretically, she may be, depending on the laws of the state, entitled to a portion, let's say half the pension, but only during the time that they're married. And if he's several years away from retirement, that pension calculation is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger as he gets closer to retirement, which means that the pension number for her now may not be that significant of a number where it will continue to multiply for him.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm
over the future time.
I'm trying to avoid, giving legal advice because we can't give a legal formula. And again, every state is different, and there's two terms that you should definitely familiarize yourself with is community property versus equitable distribution. Familiarize yourself with those terms. Know what state you live in. But Joe, broadly speaking, without wading into the territory of, giving the perception of legal advice, correct. The calculation will differ.
Well, just the pension calculation in either one of those scenarios,
right,
is the way pensions are calculated depending on how far away he is from. So which also brings up something else, Paula. If that $150,000 number is a future value number based on a projection, and he's a long way away from retirement, I'd also find that number suspect for a couple of different reasons. If she's comfortable living on $80,000 today, and they're still 15 years away from retirement, if we use the rule of 72, prices double every 18 years. That $80,000 she's comfortable living on right now is $160,000 future value against a pension projection that's actually not as big as she thinks it is. Because 150,000 future versus 160 is a lot different than 150,000 versus the 80 she's living on today. So that's a thing. So maybe if she's a long way away from retirement and it's a projection, maybe the 150,000 is right. But I'd also find that suspect in another way, which is look at all the pension reform, all the pension changes that have happened over the past 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a lot more coming, which from a financial planning standpoint, basing a pension that's a ways away, a pension projection that's a ways away, betting my future on that number, regardless of marital status, still also, I would still caution against that. But to your point, back to marital status, if the pension is a ways away, the way that pensions are calculated, no, in either one of those scenarios, whichever state she lives in, she would still, in a most equitable situation, get half of a pension number that is projected into the future. Her number is not going to be half of the end number of the pension. I mean, unless, to your point, if it happened at 62, then depending on the laws of the state, she may get half of it in the most equitable arrangement.
Well, equitable. You don't mean equitable in terms of
legalese.
Yeah, not
I mean,
in terms
of
yeah. You don't mean
most
equitable in the
favorable.
legal sense of
How
the word.
about that? The most favorable toward her
yeah.
arrangement.
Yeah, no,
could
we've got to be
half.
careful about the length. So yeah, using the term equitable not in the legal sense of the word, but rather in the as a synonym for favorable to her.
Yes.
But what happens in court is often not necessarily always favorable to a given party. And the calculation will take into account how long you've been married.
But both of us are saying, Paula, either way, there may be more retirement planning to do than she thinks there is.
Yeah. But I think it behooves her to put some assets into her own name, which an IRA would do. Especially for something as crucial as retirement. The last thing that I would say, we've spent quite a while discussing marital status. There's also the issue of if he were to pass away at a young age, if he were to pass away unexpectedly, that would also have an impact on this pension, right? That would also that would have a drastic impact on this pension. Yeah. So I think there's a life insurance component here as well, a term life insurance component.
Yeah, great point.
So thank you for asking that question, Jen. And I hope we've given you some things to think about and some lines of inquiry to pursue.